The gentle clinking of bone china against a saucer was the only sound that punctuated the hushed reverence of the hotel's grand tea lounge. Sunlight, strained through vast, arched windows, painted elongated diamonds across the plush, emerald carpet. Zara breathed it all in. The scent of jasmine tea, the faint, sweet perfume of lilies arranged in towering crystal vases, the quiet hum of souls elite murmuring behind manicured hands. She was an observer, an artist capturing the serene opulence in the charcoal lines of her sketchbook. Dressed in a simple, light pink sundress that felt a world away from the bespoke suits and silk gowns surrounding her, she was a tourist, an outsider blissfully adrift in a sea of tranquility. This was the last moment of her old life, though she didn't know it yet. She was sketching the delicate curve of a silver teapot when a shadow fell over her page. Zara looked up into the face of a woman who seemed carved from moonlight and steel. She was older, her hair a perfect chignon of silver and black, her posture radiating an authority that transcended the simple elegance of her silk suit. There was a frantic, desperate energy crackling just beneath her poised exterior. The woman, without invitation, slid into the velvet chair opposite Zara. Her eyes, dark and intelligent, scanned the room before locking onto Zara's with a startling intensity. Before Zara could form a question, the woman leaned forward, her voice a low, urgent whisper that cut through the calm. "I need you to do something for me. Your life may not depend on it, but my son's does." Zara's hand froze over her sketchbook. Her heart gave a sudden, hard thud against her ribs. This had to be a mistake. A prank. I think you have the wrong person," she stammered, her voice barely audible. The woman's lips thinned into a severe line. Her gaze flickered to a man seated across the lounge, a man with pale, watchful eyes and a smile that was all predator. He was handsome in a cruel way, exuding a palpable aura of danger that made the air around him feel colder. "That man," the woman whispered, her voice laced with a venomous fear, "is waiting for my son to show a weakness. Any weakness. And today, he believes he has found one." She turned back to Zara, her eyes pleading, yet commanding. "My son is about to walk through those doors. When he does, I need you to stand, walk to him, and kiss him as if you are the only two people in this room. You will be the picture of a woman deeply in love." Zara's mind reeled, a chaotic whirlwind of confusion and alarm. "Why me?" she managed, her throat tight. The woman's grip, surprisingly strong, closed around Zara's wrist. "Because you are not from our world. You are a stranger. You are the only one he could not possibly know." Just then, the grand entrance doors swung open. A man stepped inside, and the subtle energy of the room shifted, tilting toward him as if he were a magnetic pole. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and impossibly handsome, his black suit tailored to perfection. His face was a mask of stoic control, but as his eyes found his mother, they widened with a flicker of surprise, quickly extinguished. He began to move toward their table. This was him, the son. The woman's grip tightened. "Now," she commanded, her voice a bare whisper of sound. "Pretend you're my son's fiancée." The world seemed to slow down, the ambient sounds of the lounge fading into a dull roar in Zara's ears. The matriarch, Mrs. Kim, released her wrist, leaving a faint pressure that felt more like a brand than a touch. Across the room, the man with the predatory smile, Victor, watched them, his head tilted with a connoisseur's curiosity. There was no time to think, only to act. Jaeun, the son, was approaching, his long strides eating up the distance between them. His face was an unreadable sculpture of handsome indifference, but Zara could see the subtle tension in his jaw, the way his eyes darted from his mother to her, a silent, urgent question in their depths. Mrs. Kim gave a nearly imperceptible nod, a signal that sealed Zara's fate. Her body moved before her mind could protest, propelled by a surge of adrenaline and the terrifying certainty that refusing was not an option. She rose from her chair, her legs unsteady. Each step toward Jaeun felt like walking a tightrope over a chasm. He stopped a few feet from her, his gaze intense, searching. Her own heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She reached him, her hands trembling as she lifted them to frame his face. For a dizzying second, she saw a flash of raw confusion in his dark eyes, a vulnerability that was gone as quickly as it appeared. Then, she closed her eyes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was a collision of desperation and surprise. His lips were firm, unyielding for a moment before they softened almost imperceptibly, responding to the silent, frantic plea in her touch. It was over in a heartbeat, but it stretched into an eternity. When she pulled back, the world rushed back in. Jaehoon's arm was now wrapped firmly around her waist, his hand resting on the small of her back in a gesture of possessive intimacy. He played his part perfectly. His expression had shifted from stoic control to one of quiet adoration, a mask so convincing it sent a shiver down her spine. "There you are," he murmured, his voice a low, smooth baritone meant for her ears, but pitched just loud enough for others to overhear. I was beginning to worry before Zara could find her voice. Victor was upon them, gliding to their table like a shark sensing blood. "Jaehoon," he purred, his voice thick with a Slavic accent. "You've been holding out on us." He extended a hand, not to Jaehoon but to Zara.
Viktor Volkov.
"A pleasure." Zara placed her trembling hand in his. His grip was cold, his thumb stroking her knuckles in a way that felt both courteous and violating. Jaehoon's arm tightened around her. "Victor," he said, his tone dangerously smooth. "This is Zara. My fiancée." The word hung in the air, a lie so potent it felt like a physical weight. Victor's smile widened, but it never reached his cold, calculating eyes. "Fiancée?"
My.
"A secret engagement."
How very romantic.
"And how very unlike you." The veiled threat was unmistakable. The public performance had begun, and Zara was its unwilling star, caught in a silent war waged with polite smiles and deadly subtext. The short walk from the tea lounge to the gleaming black sedan waiting at the curb felt like a journey to another planet. The city's vibrant sounds, the cheerful chatter of tourists, and the distant melody of a street performer seemed to belong to a life she had inhabited only minutes ago but could no longer reach. Now, there was only the suffocating silence between her and the two figures who had commandeered her existence. Flanked by Jaehoon and his mother, she was guided into the car's leather-clad interior. The door closed with a heavy, final thud, sealing them in a cocoon of tinted, bulletproof glass. The city blurred into a watercolor wash of neon and concrete as the car pulled silently into traffic. Zara sat rigidly, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap her knuckles were white. She stared at her pink dress, a flimsy shield of normalcy against the crushing weight of their world. The opulence of the car, with its polished wood grain and the scent of expensive leather, felt less like a luxury and more like the interior of a gilded cage. They drove for what felt like hours, leaving the dense heart of Seoul behind for the winding, forested roads of an exclusive district. Finally, the car slowed and turned through a set of immense, unmarked iron gates that swung open without a sound. They swept up a long, private drive, flanked by ancient pine trees that stood like silent sentinels. The Kim family estate was not a house, it was a fortress. A sprawling, magnificent structure of dark wood and gray stone, it blended traditional Korean architecture with a stark, modern defensibility. High walls, almost invisible against the lush landscape, encircled the property, their tops glinting with the subtle menace of advanced security. Inside, the air was cool and still. Zara was led through a series of grand, minimalist rooms, each decorated with priceless art and antiques, yet possessing the austere, impersonal feel of a museum. She was brought to a large study, where a man stood with his back to them, gazing out a floor-to-ceiling window at a meticulously manicured garden. He turned as they entered. This was Mr. Kim. If his wife was steel and his son was controlled fire, he was the unyielding mountain from which they were forged. He was not a large man, but his presence filled the room, his silence more commanding than any shout. His dark, piercing eyes moved over Zara, not with judgment, but with a chillingly thorough assessment. He was weighing her, measuring her, calculating her utility. She was convincing, Mrs. Kim said, breaking the silence. Mr. Kim gave a slow, deliberate nod. His gaze remained on Zara. "My son's life was in your hands today," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. It wasn't an accusation, but a statement of fact. "We are grateful," gratitude, Zara thought, felt terrifyingly close to ownership. "For this deception to hold," Mr. Kim continued, his voice leaving no room for argument, "it must be flawless. Viktor Volkov is not a man who overlooks details. He will have his people looking into you by now. When they do, they must find a story that is airtight." He gestured to a chair. "You will be staying with us. You will learn our history. You will become part of our family in every way that matters to the outside world. To leave now is to paint a target on your own back.
You are a part of this now."
The only way out is through." Zara's protest died in her throat. The finality in his tone was absolute. The choice had never been hers at all. Later, after his parents had left them, Jaehoon escorted her to a sprawling suite of rooms that were to be hers. The silence between them was a heavy, charged thing, filled with the unsaid and the unknown. The suite was beautiful, a prison of silk and jade, with a balcony overlooking a serene koi pond. But the windows didn't open more than a few inches, and a discreet, dark-suited guard was stationed at the end of the hall. Jaehoon finally spoke, his back to her as he stared out at the darkening garden. "My father is right. Leaving is not an option." His voice was flat, devoid of the false warmth he'd shown in the lounge. "Viktor has seen your face. If you were to disappear now, he would know today was a lie. He would see it as a weakness, an opening. And he would strike." Zara found a sliver of her own anger, a spark of defiance in the overwhelming sea of fear. "And what happens to me when he decides to strike anyway? Am I just collateral damage?" He turned to face her then, and for the first time, she saw a crack in his stoic facade. A flash of something that looked like regret, or perhaps fury at his own powerlessness to change the circumstances. "I will not let anything happen to you," he said, the words low and intense. "You are under my protection now, which means you will follow my rules. You do not leave this estate without me. You do not speak to anyone outside this family without my permission. You trust no one. Is that clear?" It was a command, not a question. Zara simply nodded, her throat too tight to speak. He seemed to hold her gaze for a moment longer than necessary, a silent, complex assessment passing between them before he turned and left, closing the door softly behind him. Alone at last, Zara sank onto the edge of the enormous silk-covered bed, her body trembling with delayed shock. It was then that her phone buzzed on the nightstand, a lifeline to a world that no longer felt real. She snatched it up. The screen glowed with a picture of her best friend, Chloe, grinning on a beach.
"Zara."
"Oh my God, you will not believe the market I found in Insadong." Chloe's voice was a cheerful, sun-drenched wave of normalcy that crashed against Zara's new reality, and the impact was devastating. "They have these amazing handmade brushes. I bought you a set. Are you having a good time?" "You are so quiet today." Zara squeezed her eyes shut, fighting back a sob. She looked around the opulent room, her gilded cage. "Yes," she lied, her voice a strained whisper. "I'm having an amazing time. I met someone." The life felt like acid on her tongue, a bitter confirmation that every part of her life, from this moment on, was now a performance. The next morning began the systematic dismantling of Zara Adebayo, the visiting artist, and the construction of Zara, the beloved fiancée of Kim Jae-hoon. The process was orchestrated by Mrs. Kim with the precision of a military campaign. A team of stylists descended upon her suite, their arms laden with designer garments in muted, expensive tones of cream, charcoal, and navy. Her comfortable, colorful dresses were whisked away, replaced by silk blouses, tailored trousers, and elegant sheaths that felt like costumes. "Subtlety is strength," Mrs. Kim had instructed, her eyes appraising Zara's new form in a three-way mirror. "You must look timeless, untouchable." An etiquette coach, a severe woman with a tightly wound bun, spent 2 hours schooling her on the intricate art of pouring tea, the correct way to address various elders and business associates, and how to maintain a serene, pleasant expression even under intense scrutiny. It was suffocating. Every gesture, every word, was being polished and perfected, stripping away her own spontaneous warmth and replacing it with a calculated grace. Jaehoon was a constant, brooding presence through it all. He sat in on the sessions where they constructed their shared history, his contributions clipped and concise. They decided on a chance meeting at a gallery in London, a whirlwind romance cultivated over long-distance calls, a quiet, private proposal. The details felt hollow and absurd, a fictional love story for a fictional couple. Yet, during these sessions, something began to shift. Forced to spend hours in close proximity, a different kind of tension began to simmer between them, one that had less to do with danger and more to do with an unwelcome, undeniable awareness of each other. Zara found herself watching him, noticing the fine lines of exhaustion around his eyes, the way he would rub a faded scar on his left knuckle when he thought no one was looking. He, in turn, would watch her, his gaze lingering when she spoke, a flicker of something unreadable in his expression when she laughed at a particularly absurd detail in their fabricated past. The most terrifying part was how quickly she was adapting. The fear was a constant, a cold knot in her stomach, but she was learning to function around it. The constant performance was becoming a second skin. One afternoon, while being briefed on the family's public-facing business holdings by a prim security advisor, Zara needed a glass of water. As she walked down a long, quiet corridor toward the kitchen, she passed a half-open door. The voices from within were low and urgent, not meant for her ears. "Victor's men hit the Busan shipment," a gruff voice said. "4 of ours are gone. They didn't even try to take the product." It was a message the blunt, brutal words stopped her cold. This was the reality beneath the silk and porcelain, a world of violence and death, of messages sent in blood. She backed away slowly, her heart pounding, the cold knot of fear tightening its grip. As she rounded the corner, she nearly collided with a young man who had been approaching from the other direction. He was handsome, with a charming, easy smile that was a stark contrast to Jaehoon's stoicism. "Whoa, there," he said, steadying her with a hand on her arm. "You look like you've seen a ghost." He introduced himself as Minjun, Jaehoon's cousin. His demeanor was warm and reassuring. "Don't let this place intimidate you," he said with a conspiratorial wink. "The bark is much worse than the bite. Jaehoon may seem like a thundercloud, but he's a good man. I'm glad he's finally found someone. If you ever need a friend, or just someone to talk to who isn't a bodyguard, I'm here." His kindness was a balm, but as he walked away, a prickle of unease traced its way down her spine. His questions had been friendly, but just a little too probing about how she was really feeling, how she was really handling the pressure. It was a feeling she couldn't shake. Later that evening, Mrs. Kim decided they needed to be seen as a believable couple, which, in her mind, required them to be able to dance together at an upcoming charity gala. A string quartet was assembled in the cavernous ballroom. As Jaehoon took her in his arms, the professional distance they'd maintained dissolved. Her hand rested on his shoulder, his on her waist. The heat of his palm seemed to burn through the fabric of her dress. They moved together stiffly at first, two strangers forced into an intimate orbit. But as the sad, sweet melody of the cello filled the air, their bodies began to find a rhythm. The world narrowed to the space between them, the scent of his cologne, the soft brush of his jacket against her cheek. The pretense, the danger, the lies, it all faded away for a few stolen moments. He looked down at her, his dark eyes vulnerable for the first time. "You are a fast learner," he whispered, his voice rough with an emotion she couldn't name. And in that quiet, shared moment, a new and far more complicated danger was born. The night of the Washin Charity Gala arrived like a verdict. The air in the Kim estate was thick with a nervous, electric energy. For Zara, it felt like being prepped for battle. She stood before the mirror in her suite while a stylist made final adjustments to a breathtaking gown of midnight blue silk. It was a masterpiece of understated elegance, designed to command respect, not just attention. But it felt like armor, heavy and foreign. "Remember your posture," Mrs. Kim advised, observing her from the doorway. "Your smile is a shield. Tonight, every person in that room will be watching you, judging you. They will be looking for a flaw in the story. Do not give them 1 inch." Her words were a chilling reminder of the stakes. This wasn't a party. It was a performance on a hostile stage. The grand ballroom of the hotel was a glittering battlefield. A sea of Seoul's most powerful figures, draped in jewels and designer suits, mingled under the brilliant light of crystal chandeliers. The air hummed with whispered conversations and the clinking of champagne flutes. To Zara, every glance felt like scrutiny, every polite smile a potential threat. Jaehoon was a formidable presence by her side, his hand a constant, reassuring weight on the small of her back. He navigated the treacherous social currents with an effortless grace, introducing her with a quiet pride that felt unnervingly real. She played her part, smiling until her cheeks ached, murmuring the correct pleasantries, her mind racing to recall the names and affiliations she had been forced to memorize. And then she saw him. Viktor Volkov moved through the crowd like a panther, sleek and dangerous in a perfectly tailored tuxedo. He was holding court, a circle of sycophants laughing a little too loudly at his remarks. When his cold eyes found theirs, he excused himself and began to glide toward them.
Jaehoon.
"And the lovely Zara," he purred, his smile a predatory slash. "You make a stunning couple." An unexpected one, I must admit. His gaze swept over Zara, lingering with an insolent appraisal. He usually prefers less complicated assets. The insult was a deliberate provocation, a poison dart aimed at her, but intended for Jaehoon. Zara could feel Jaehoon tense beside her, a low growl of fury rumbling in his chest. But before he could respond, a strange, steely calm settled over her. She was tired of being a pawn, a frightened girl in a pink dress. She met Viktor's gaze directly, her chin held high. "Jaehoon doesn't choose his assets, Mr. Volkov," she said, her voice clear and steady, cutting through the ambient noise. "He chooses his family." The silence that followed was electric. Viktor's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, a flicker of surprise in his cold eyes. Jaehoon looked down at her, his expression a mixture of shock and something that looked intensely like pride. She had not only defended herself, she had claimed a place, drawn a line in the sand. From across the room, she saw Jaehoon's cousin, Minjun, watching the exchange. As Viktor finally turned away, his veneer of courtesy now chillingly thin, Zara saw Minjun subtly catch the eye of one of Viktor's lieutenants standing near the bar. There was no gesture, no note, just a shared look, a fleeting, almost imperceptible moment of understanding that screamed of betrayal. A cold dread washed over her. The greatest threat wasn't always the one staring you in the face. The thought had barely formed when one of Jaehoon's main security men appeared at his elbow, his face pale and grim. He leaned in, whispering a few urgent words. The transformation in Jaehoon was instantaneous and terrifying. The carefully constructed mask of the calm businessman shattered, replaced by the cold, brutal fury of a commander on the verge of losing a war. His eyes were black with rage. Without a word of explanation to the stunned onlookers, he grabbed Zara's hand, his grip like a vice. "We're leaving," he bit out, his voice a low, vicious snarl. Now he pulled her through the crowd, his security detail materializing around them, clearing a path. The curious, shocked faces of Seoul's elite became a blur. The music, the laughter, the glittering chandeliers all faded into a distant memory as they were plunged from the deceptive light of the gala into the raw, urgent darkness of the unknown. The chaos of their exit was a violent blur. Jaehoon's security detail moved with brutal efficiency, parting the sea of stunned socialites like a ship's prow through water. The air outside the hotel was cold, a stark shock after the ballroom's warmth. They were bundled into the back of the waiting sedan before the doors had even fully opened, the engine roaring to life and peeling away from the curb with a squeal of tires that ripped through the night's polite facade. Inside the car, the silence was a roaring vacuum. Jaehoon stared out the window, his jaw a rigid line of granite, the city's neon lights flashing across the furious planes of his face. He hadn't let go of Zara's hand. His grip was painfully tight, an anchor of rage in the swirling storm of his emotions. Zara watched him, her own fear a cold, metallic taste in her mouth. This was the man behind the mask, stripped of all pretense. The controlled businessman was gone, and in his place was a predator who had just seen his territory violated. "What happened?" she finally dared to ask, her voice small in the cavernous interior of the car. He turned his head slowly, his eyes meeting hers. The fury in them was so raw, so potent, it made her flinch. "Victor didn't just come to the gala to trade insults," he said, his voice a low, chilling growl. "While he was smiling in our faces, his men were hitting a private cargo port we control in Incheon. The one my father was personally overseeing tonight." The blood drained from Zara's face. "Mr. Kim, the formidable, unshakable patriarch. Is he?" "He's alive." Jaehoon cut her off, the words sharp as broken glass. "He wasn't on site, but many of our men were. It wasn't a raid, Zara. It was a massacre. They executed everyone. They didn't take a single thing." He finally released her hand, running his own through his perfectly styled hair, disrupting its order. It was a gesture of such profound frustration and grief that it humanized him more than any smile ever could. "It was a message. The one you intercepted tonight was for show." This was the real 1 inch. He leaned his head back against the leather seat, closing his eyes for a brief moment. "He's declaring war." The car sped through the night, a black arrow aimed at the heart of a brewing storm. Zara looked at Jaehoon, at the man burdened by a weight she could barely comprehend, and felt a new emotion stirring beneath her fear, a fierce, protective instinct. She reached out, her fingers hesitating for a second before gently resting on his clenched fist. He didn't pull away. His fingers uncurled, his hand turning to tentatively entwine with hers. It was not a gesture of romance, but of shared humanity in the face of impending darkness, a silent acknowledgement that they were in this together, whether they had chosen it or not. The estate was on high alert. The serene fortress had become a military command center, dark sedans sweeping up the drive and men in sharp suits speaking in low, urgent tones into earpieces. The atmosphere inside was suffocatingly tense. Mr. Kim was already in his study, a formidable, silent statue of contained rage, while Mrs. Kim directed staff and security with the cool, efficient authority of a general. Zara felt like a ghost, drifting through the hallways, completely out of her depth. She was a liability, a civilian caught in a war zone. She retreated to her suite, the silken prison feeling more constricting than ever. She stood on the balcony, wrapping her arms around herself as she stared into the dark, manicured gardens. The cool night air did little to calm the frantic beating of her heart. She heard the soft click of the door opening behind her, but didn't turn. She knew it was him. Jaehoon came to stand beside her, the silence stretching between them, thick with the night's tragic events. He had shed his tuxedo jacket and tie, his white shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, and he looked utterly exhausted. "You should try to get some sleep," he said, his voice rough. "I can't," she confessed, her voice a whisper. "All I can see are their faces at the party, and now She trailed off, unable to articulate the horror. "What you did tonight," he said, changing the subject, his gaze fixed on the distant city lights. "Standing up to Victor. No one has ever done that for me." Zara turned to look at him, at his proud, handsome profile outlined by the moonlight. "I wasn't doing it for you," she said softly. "I was doing it for us. For the story we're supposed to be telling." His eyes met hers, and in their depths, she saw a flicker of the same vulnerability she'd seen in the ballroom. "Is that all it was?" he asked, his voice low. "A story?" The air crackled between them. The danger, the lies, the forced proximity had forged a strange, unwilling intimacy. The adrenaline of the evening had stripped them down to their essential selves, and a truth, fragile and dangerous, was beginning to bloom in the ruins. He took a half-step closer, his hand coming up to gently cup her cheek. His thumb brushed over her skin, a touch so tender it made her breath catch. "Zara," he murmured, her name a quiet prayer on his lips. "When I saw you walking toward me in that tea lounge, I thought my mother had lost her mind. I saw a complication I didn't need." He paused, his gaze searching hers.
"Now,
"I think you may be the only thing that makes any sense in all of this." He leaned in, and this time there was no pretense, no audience. It was a kiss born of desperation and gratitude, of fear and a dawning, terrifying hope. It was a moment of solace in the heart of the storm, a quiet promise that even in this world of violence and lies, something real might still have a chance to grow. The next day, the family convened in Mr. Kim's study. The mood was somber, heavy with grief and the thirst for retribution. Zara was asked to attend, a gesture that signified her new, albeit precarious, position within the inner circle. She sat beside Jaehoon, his presence a solid, reassuring warmth. They were discussing security protocols, trying to understand how Victor's intelligence could have been so precise, so perfect. They were speaking of leaks, of betrayal. The men in the room, uncles, cousins, high-ranking lieutenants, all swore their loyalty, their faces grim. And then Zara saw Min-jun. He was the picture of sorrow, his charming smile replaced with a look of pained concern as he spoke of the men they had lost. But Zara's mind kept replaying that moment at the gala, the fleeting, almost invisible look that had passed between him and Victor's man. It was nothing, a phantom of her overstressed imagination, perhaps. But it felt like everything. Her heart hammered against her ribs. To speak up was to risk everything. She was the outsider, the fake fiancée. Accusing a blood relative, Jaehoon's own cousin, was an act of insanity. But to stay silent felt like a betrayal of her own. As Min-jun finished speaking, his words of loyalty hanging in the air, Zara took a shaky breath. "It was you," she said, her voice quiet but carrying in the suddenly silent room. Every head turned to her. Min-jun's face registered a perfect, wounded confusion. "I beg your pardon?" he asked, his voice laced with disbelief. Mr. Kim's eyes narrowed, two chips of obsidian fixed on her. "Explain yourself," he commanded. Her voice trembled, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. "At the gala. After the confrontation with Victor. I saw you. You looked at one of his men. It was just for a second, but it wasn't a casual glance. It was a signal." Min-jun let out a short, incredulous laugh. "This is absurd." "She's hysterical. The pressure has clearly gotten to her." An uncle standing near the window nodded in agreement. "The girl is new to our world. She sees shadows where there are none." But Jaehoon didn't look at Zara with doubt. He looked at her with a chilling stillness, his mind clearly working, connecting unseen dots. He remembered Min-jun's subtle probing, his friendly questions about Zara's state of mind, his constant, low-level resentment over Jaehoon's position as heir. He turned to face his cousin. "Where were you 2 nights ago, Min-jun?" he asked, his voice dangerously calm. "I was at my apartment." Min-jun scoffed, though a flicker of panic crossed his features. "Alone? That's a lie," Jaehoon stated flatly. "I had you followed. You met with one of Volkov's financial advisors. You thought we wouldn't notice." The air in the room turned to ice. Min-jun's charming facade crumbled, revealing the ugly, sneering resentment beneath. Zara had not been seeing shadows. She had seen the truth. The trap was set with cold, quiet precision. Mr. Kim, his face an impassive mask that betrayed none of his cold fury, convened another meeting. In front of Min-jun, he laid out a plan to move a significant shipment of untraceable bearer bonds, a contingency fund, to a secure location outside the city. The details were specific: the route, the time, the number of guards. It was all a lie. A ghost convoy for a ghost shipment. Zara watched Min-jun from across the room. He absorbed the information with feigned diligence, asking the right questions, his concern for the family's assets appearing entirely genuine. But his eyes held a glint of greedy, triumphant light. He thought he was about to deliver the final, crippling blow to his own family. The waiting was the hardest part. Zara sat with Jaehoon in a darkened security office, watching a bank of monitors that showed the empty, predetermined route. The silence between them was not tense, but companionable. He had trusted her, his faith in her instincts absolute, and in doing so, had forged a bond between them stronger than any lie they had ever told. "You were right," he said quietly, his eyes on the screen. "I wanted you to be wrong. He's my blood. But I knew you were right. I'm sorry," she whispered. He shook his head, a muscle working in his jaw. "The weakness isn't in seeing the truth. It's in refusing to." An hour after the ghost convoy was meant to have departed, a report came in over the secure channel. A heavily armed team, bearing the unmistakable strategic signature of Viktor Volkov's mercenaries, had ambushed the designated route. They had hit an empty road, a trap sprung on nothing but air. The betrayal was confirmed beyond any doubt. Minjun was summoned back to the study. He walked in with a swagger, expecting praise, only to find himself facing his father, his uncle, and Jaeun, their expressions as unforgiving as a winter sky. The evidence was laid out, irrefutable. His secret meetings, his offshore bank accounts suddenly flush with money from a shell corporation linked to Volkov. His face paled, his charming smile dissolving into a panicked sneer. "He offered me more," he spat, his composure finally breaking. "More than you ever would. I was always second best. The charming cousin, the useful nephew, but never the heir, never the one with real power." Mr. Kim stepped forward, his small stature seeming to loom over his treacherous nephew. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "Power is not taken," the patriarch said, his voice a low, lethal rumble. "It is earned. Through loyalty. A lesson you will now have a lifetime to contemplate." Two guards stepped out of the shadows. They took Minjun by the arms. He didn't struggle. He simply looked at Jaeun with eyes full of a pathetic, bitter hatred. As they dragged him from the room and from the family forever, Zara knew his lifetime of contemplation was likely to be brutally short. The immediate threat from within had been neutralized, but the victory felt hollow. Minjun's betrayal had exposed vulnerabilities that Viktor Volkov would be ruthless in exploiting. The war was no longer a cold one fought with veiled threats and strategic losses. It was now a personal, bloody conflict. The estate, once a symbol of impenetrable strength, now felt like a beautiful, besieged island. In the quiet that followed the storm, Zara found herself on her balcony again, the place where everything had changed. The moon was high and bright, casting the garden in shades of silver and deep shadow. The air was calm, a stark contrast to the turmoil in her heart. She was no longer just a performer. She had influenced events, saved lives, and exposed a traitor. She was a part of this world now, entangled in its deadly web. The door opened and closed softly. Jaeun came to stand beside her, his presence a familiar comfort. He didn't speak for a long time, simply sharing the silence with her. "My father wants to thank you," he finally said. "He wants to offer you anything you want. A new life, anywhere in the world. Money, protection. A clean slate. It was the out she never thought she would get. A chance to return to her world of charcoal sketches and quiet tea lounges, to leave the violence and the fear behind. She could go back to being Zara Adebayo, the artist. But the thought of leaving him, of this intense, terrifying, and unexpectedly profound connection, left a gaping void in her chest. She turned to face him, the moonlight catching the sorrow and conflict in her eyes. "Is that what you want?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "For me to go?" He took a step closer, his hands coming up to frame her face, his touch gentle, reverent. "What I want," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he no longer tried to hide, "is for you to be safe. And you will never be safe with me." "I haven't felt safe since the moment your mother sat down at my table," she replied, a faint smile touching her lips. "But here with you, I don't feel so afraid." The truth of the statement settled between them, undeniable and powerful. He leaned down and kissed her, a deep, searching kiss that was not about gratitude or desperation, but about choice. A choice to stay, a choice to fight, a choice to feel something real in a world built on lies. He pulled back, his forehead resting against hers. "This started as a deception to protect my life," he whispered. "But it's not a lie anymore, Zara. Not for me." His words were the most honest thing she had ever heard. Just as hope began to dawn, his face hardened with the grim weight of reality. "Victor knows we've dealt with Minjun. He knows we're expecting him. He won't just hit our businesses anymore. He'll come for the heart of the family. He'll come for you." The story was not over. The cliffhanger was not a closing chapter, but the edge of a precipice. They were no longer pretending. They were a united front, bound by a dangerous truth, staring together into the encroaching darkness as they waited for the inevitable storm to break.